Imagine getting an invitation to the most exclusive party in town, only to be told you don't belong. That's exactly what happened to Alina, a brilliant professor caught in a silent battle for respect. Her story isn't just about a seat at a table. It's about dignity, power, and the fight to be seen. Hit subscribe and stay with us because this is a story you won't forget. Alina stood in her quiet kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window, glinting off the delicate gold lettering on the invitation resting before her. It wasn't like the usual academic conference invites she was accustomed to. Polished, professional, safe. This was something else entirely. An elegant card embossed with gilded script, promising an evening of luxury and exclusivity at the city's most elite restaurant. Her fingers traced the smooth edges as a knot tightened in her chest. Why did this feel so different? She wondered. It was more than just a birthday party. It was a symbol, a test she never asked for but could no longer ignore. Jordan said it's important, she murmured, recalling her husband's casual words over dinner weeks ago. He said we're invited, both of us. Both of them. The weight of that both lingered in the air. It was the kind of invitation that meant doors opened, whispers stopped, and gazes followed. But Alina knew the rules weren't written. On invitations, they were etched in every glance, every hesitation, every invisible boundary that told her where she belonged. She wasn't the type to play by unspoken rules. She never had been. Her life was a series of battles fought with quiet strength, proving her brilliance in lecture halls, publishing papers in journals, navigating spaces where her presence was an exception, not the norm. But this was different. A part of her ached with a familiar tension, the sharp sting of knowing that no matter how much she achieved, her skin would always be a question mark in rooms like these. That beneath the polished chandeliers and clinking crystal, some would see her not as a guest but as a challenge. Still, she decided, she would go, not to perform, not to appease, but to claim what was hers. Her choice of outfit was deliberate. No gaudy logos, no designer labels, just a flowing white dress that moved with grace and quiet confidence. She wanted her presence to speak louder than any brand or accessory. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun, a soft cascade of coils framing her face like a halo of calm. As the Uber pulled up to the gleaming facade of Vivra Blanc, Alina's breath hitched. The restaurant looked like a fortress of privilege, glass and chrome shimmering in the afternoon sun, the kind of place where secrets hid behind silverware and silence. She stepped out, heels clicking against the polished stone. The valet opened the door, his eyes flicking briefly over her. It wasn't hostility. No, it was something colder. A calculated scan, weighing her worth in seconds, deciding if she fit the image. Alina straightened her spine, chin lifted. I belong. Here, she told herself. Because I do. Inside, the room unfolded like a carefully curated dream. Marble floors gleamed beneath a chandelier that looked like frozen fireworks. The scent of truffle and champagne hung heavy in the air, subtle but undeniable. She approached the hostess stand, her voice steady. Good afternoon. There's a birthday party for Madison Langford. My name is Alina Moore. I believe my reservation should be under that name. The hostess, a young woman with tight blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, glanced at her. I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't see a reservation under that name. Alina blinked. No, she thought. There has to be. My husband, Jordan Moore, confirmed it directly. Table 3 by the garden window. The hostess's smile tightened. She flipped through the book again, slower this time. Then she leaned in, whispering to another staff member. Alina stepped aside, blending into the background as music and conversation flowed around her like a river she wasn't allowed to swim in. Minutes ticked by. She watched guests arrive, effortlessly. Dressed, effortlessly accepted. A woman in a red dress swept past without a second glance. A man in linen nodded once and was led away to a private lounge. And then, like a storm wrapped in satin, Veronica Langley entered. Blonde, tanned, confident. The hostess straightened, calling her by name. Table 3, Miss Langley. Alina's heart hammered. "Excuse me," she said, voice low but firm. "That's my table." The hostess blinked, caught between protocol and perception. "There must have been a mix-up. Miss Langley is a regular here." Alina's gaze hardened. "My husband reserved that table for me, weeks ago." From behind, a man approached, slick hair, navy suit, name tag reading Gareth Simmons. His eyes locked on Alina, lingering just a moment too long. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly. "The table isn't available. We can seat you near the kitchen." The words hit her like a slap. Near the kitchen, the back door, the service hallway, the place where guests are out of sight and out of mind. Her jaw clenched, but her voice stayed calm. "You're offering me the kitchen while someone else sits at the table I reserved?" Gareth shrugged, detached. "Sometimes mix-ups happen." Alina looked around. No Jordan, no allies. Just a room full of silent judgments and invisible lines. Her fists curled at her sides, not with anger but with the raw effort of holding herself together. Just as Gareth motioned to security, a low hum sliced through the tension. A sound unlike anything the valet had heard that day. Heads turned. The doors parted and in walked Jordan Moore. Marcus Reed had lived 2 blocks from the Carters for nearly a decade. He'd watched their family grow quietly, but proudly, in the midst of the city's glitz and bustle. A retired detective, Marcus had an instinct for reading people. A skill, honed by years on the force and countless untold stories behind closed doors. When Jordan called him that afternoon, his voice steady but tight, Marcus knew something was off before a single word was spoken. "Marcus," Jordan began. "Alina just called. They erased her reservation at Vivra Blanc." Marcus frowned. Vivra Blanc, the city's crown jewel of exclusivity. The kind of place where a table wasn't just a spot to eat, but a throne carved out by money, influence, and connections. "Erased?" Marcus asked. "How do you lose a reservation like that?" "That's just it. It wasn't lost, it was taken. And given away to someone else." A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Marcus thought back to the times he'd been at Jordan and Alina's home. Quiet dinners, the subtle but unmistakable tension Alina carried with her whenever they stepped into certain rooms. It wasn't just the social codes or the unspoken rules. It was the weight of always being seen as an outsider in places she deserved to belong. He remembered Alina's laughter, warm and genuine, masking the battles she fought just to be acknowledged. And Jordan's quiet strength, never loud, never boastful, but fiercely protective. Marcus felt his own chest tighten. This wasn't just a social slight. This was a pattern, a system built on exclusion and silent barriers. He pictured Alina arriving at the restaurant, the polished floors, the shimmering chandeliers, the smell of expensive wine and privilege that felt suffocating rather than welcoming. "Man, I've seen this before," Marcus said quietly into the phone. "It's not about the food or the party. It's about control. About who gets to be seen and who's supposed to stay invisible." Jordan's voice dropped, low and fierce. She was offered a seat by the kitchen, like she should be grateful. To even be inside, Marcus's mind raced. He knew the kitchen, hot, busy, filled with back-of-house staff, the farthest place from the elegance and respect the front room bestowed. It was a place for work, not for celebration, for service, not for status. "That's an insult," Marcus said. "Plain and simple." Jordan paused, then added, "I'm on my way now. I'm going to fix this." Marcus could hear the determination in his friend's voice, a quiet storm about to break. Later that evening, Marcus stood outside Vivra Blanc, watching the sleek cars pull up, guests stepping out in gowns and suits, smiles practiced and eyes sharp. The kind of smiles that don't always reach the soul. He spotted the valet, polite but cold, as he opened the door for a tall woman in silk and diamonds. Marcus's gaze followed the hostess nodding to another table, directing a couple away, from the garden window. And then through the crowd, Marcus saw her, Alina alone, standing firm but clearly uncomfortable. His heart ached for her. How many times has she had to stand like this? He wondered. How many times has she been told she doesn't belong without words? Nearby, a few guests whispered. Some glanced at their phones, snapping pictures under the table. The energy was tense, electric. Marcus's eyes caught the subtle exchanges, the slight narrowing of eyes, the forced laughs, the way people shifted in their seats. This wasn't just a party. It was a battleground. As Marcus watched, a black Tesla pulled up silently. Jordan stepped out, calm, composed, the weight of his presence unmistakable. Marcus felt the atmosphere shift instantly. People stopped talking. Glasses paused mid-air. The room held its breath. Jordan's eyes found Alina standing by the door. There was a brief, invisible exchange between them. Strength meeting strength. Marcus's fingers clenched. This is it, he thought. This is the moment everything changes. He caught a glimpse of the restaurant manager approaching Jordan, face pale but defiant. Marcus could almost hear the unspoken tension between them, the clash of power, pride, and principle. Nearby, a young server shifted nervously, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Marcus remembered his own days as a rookie, how fear could silence truth. But tonight, the silence was breaking. Marcus thought back to his years on the force, the countless times justice had felt just out of reach, not because it was absent, but because the system resisted change. He looked again at Alina, her posture unyielding, chin high despite the whispers and stares. She's fighting not just for a seat at the table, Marcus realized. She's fighting for respect, for dignity, for the right to be seen as she is. As Jordan began to speak, his voice low but steady, cutting through the polished air, Marcus felt a surge of hope. This wasn't about money or influence. It was about truth. It was about standing firm in the face of erasure. Marcus sighed deeply, feeling the weight of history and possibility in the room. Outside, the city hummed unaware, but inside Vivra Blanc, something far greater was unfolding. The moment Jordan Moore stepped through the doors of Vivra Blanc, the air shifted like a sudden storm rolling over a still lake. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses paused at lips. The hum of the string quartet faltered, as if the notes themselves sensed the coming reckoning. Jordan moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had long mastered power, not the flashy kind that demanded attention, but the steady, unyielding force that made the room bend without a word. His charcoal gray suit whispered wealth, tailored to perfection, every stitch a statement of precision. His eyes scanned the room with a calculated calm until they locked on the figure of Alina, standing alone, arms crossed, jaw set, eyes blazing, with restrained fire. In that instant, the glittering crowd around them blurred into irrelevance. Jordan's expression tightened just barely, a narrowing of eyes, a subtle flex of jaw muscles, signals invisible to most but screaming volumes to those who knew him. He crossed the room in swift, purposeful strides, the soft click of his shoes on marble echoing like a drumbeat of justice. "Have you been standing here all this time?" he asked, voice low but cutting through the silence like a blade. Alina's shoulders relaxed fractionally, but her gaze didn't waver. She didn't need to answer. The question hung thick between them, heavy with unspoken frustration and pain. "Table 3, she finally said, nodding toward the hostess stand where Amber, the young woman who'd denied her reservation, stood stiffly. "Reserved in my name. Given away." Jordan's eyes flicked to Gareth Simmons, the restaurant manager who had just appeared behind Amber, his sleek navy suit oddly out of place amid the tension. The man's gaze lingered on Alina for a beat too long, the kind of look that weighed her as a problem rather than a guest. "I see," Jordan said, voice smooth but laced with iron. "So you gave my wife's reserved table to someone else." Gareth cleared his throat, offering a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There. Seems to have been a misunderstanding, Mr. Moore. We didn't realize this guest was your wife." Jordan's lips pressed into a thin line, the faintest edge of disbelief flickering across his face. "You didn't realize, or you chose not to." The room shifted uncomfortably. Several guests exchanged glances, suddenly aware that they were witnessing something far beyond an ordinary social slight. Amber averted her eyes, fiddling nervously with her name tag. "Veronica Langley, The woman, now comfortably seated at table 3, lifted her glass with a practiced smirk that barely hid her unease. Jordan's voice dropped, resonant with quiet fury. "If she hadn't been my wife," he said slowly, "would her reservation have magically reappeared?" No one answered. The silence pressed in like a physical force tightening around Gareth's shoulders. Alina watched the scene with a strange detachment, like a spectator watching a play she had lived 1,000 times before. But this time, the stakes were different. The room wasn't just judging her, it was judging itself. "I'm sorry," Gareth began again, but his words stumbled. "We had a last-minute request from a valued guest." Jordan's gaze sharpened. "Which guest?" Gareth hesitated, swallowing hard. "Miss Langley," Alina said quietly, the name slicing through the air. "The same woman who looks at me like I'm housekeeping." Jordan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "You gave away my wife's seat to a woman who walked in without a reservation," he said, "simply because she looked more appropriate." The word hung between them, heavy with accusation. Amber shifted, uncomfortable. Veronica's smirk flickered, but she held her ground, raising her glass. "It's just a party," she said lightly, as if that excused the insult. But Jordan wasn't finished. "This is exactly why I stayed in the shadows," he said, voice calm but filled with cutting clarity. "To watch how this place operates. I've heard the rumors, seen the patterns. Today you gave me proof." The room held its breath. Jordan's gaze swept over the guests, most white, most wealthy, many complicit in the unspoken rules. "You judged my wife not by who she is, but by what she wears, by what she carries on her wrist or around her neck. You buried her name beneath your biases." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Veronica, now visibly uncomfortable, scoffed. "Drama, really." But Jordan didn't waver. "My name is Jordan. Elijah Moore," he said evenly. "Majority shareholder of this establishment." Heads turned. "I am not here to raise my voice. But when you erase the name of the woman standing beside me, you erase your own integrity." Alina felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a cloak. She met Gareth's eyes. No apology, no excuse could erase what had happened. Jordan extended his hand to her, not as a gesture of comfort, but as an unspoken vow of solidarity. They walked together toward the table, the one that had been stolen. Veronica's eyes flicked up, cold and sharp. "You're in the wrong seat," Jordan said quietly, but every word was a thunderclap. Veronica stood slowly, as if granting the room a final show of power. "Looks like we're all learning our places today," she said, voice dripping with faux innocence. Alina's response was razor sharp. "This is about principle, about respect." A few guests shifted uneasily. The room was no longer a playground of luxury. It was a battlefield of unmasked truths. Jordan stood behind Alina's chair, arms folded, unwavering. Gareth approached once more, flanked by security. "Perhaps Dr. Osa Moore should be moved," he suggested, voice strained, to ease the tension. Alina rose, slow and deliberate, eyes cold steel. "Let me be clear," she said softly. "You denied my reservation, offered me the kitchen, gave my table away, and now you want to move me because your guests are uncomfortable?" She looked at the security guards. "Do you want to drag me out too? Because I promise I've survived worse." A silence thicker than any chandelier hung heavy. The guards shifted, uncertain whose side they were on. Jordan stepped forward. "We are no longer speaking as manager and investor," he said. "We are speaking as two men on opposite sides of a lawsuit." The word echoed, sharp, electric. Heads turned openly now. Someone dropped a fork. Gareth's composure cracked. "This isn't just about a seat," Jordan said. "It's about a system that values whiteness over worth, entitlement over respect." The room was swallowed by a silence heavy with guilt and reckoning. Alina sat, calm but fierce, a quiet fury burning beneath her composed exterior. Jordan's hand rested on her shoulder, not to comfort, but to stand beside her as an equal. No, moved, the walls seemed to close in. The moment had passed, but its impact would linger. This wasn't a simple social mishap. It was a reckoning, and no one in Vivra Blanc would ever forget it. The echoes of confrontation still reverberated through Vivra Blanc long after the guests had returned to their dinners. But something had shifted, irrevocably. The polished veneer of exclusivity had cracked, revealing the uncomfortable truths beneath. And at the center of it all sat Alina Moore, no longer invisible, no longer displaced. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines called out Vivra Blanc's silent discrimination, sparking conversations far beyond its marble walls. Social media buzzed with voices sharing similar experiences, stories of exclusion, coded biases, and the invisible velvet ropes that often go unnoticed but never unfelt. Jordan Moore, once a quiet investor, now stood openly as the architect of change. His insistence on accountability led to swift action. The removal of the manager who orchestrated the erasures, the overhaul of reservation systems, and the introduction of new policies designed to root out bias, not just mask it. For Alina, the journey had never been about vengeance. It was about reclaiming space, not only for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told without words that they did not belong. Her return to Vivra Blanc, walking confidently past the same doors that once framed her humiliation, was more than a personal victory. It was a declaration that dignity cannot be denied, that true luxury is not about who you know or what you wear, but about the respect you command simply by being human. At table 3, the now symbolic seat, by the garden window, Alina took her rightful place. Around her, the atmosphere had changed. The once cold gazes softened. The whispers turned to acknowledgments. The restaurant itself seemed to breathe easier, as if relieved to shed its pretense. Yet Alina's eyes held something deeper than satisfaction, a quiet fire, a reminder of the battles still ahead. Change, she knew, was never a destination but a constant struggle. Her story had ignited a movement. Other establishments began auditing their own practices. Staff were empowered to speak up. Technology was harnessed to bring transparency where there had been shadows, and while resistance remained, the tide had turned. For Alina and Jordan, the fight had forged a new partnership, one rooted not just in love but in shared purpose. Jordan no longer operated from the shadows. He stepped forward as a visible force for equity and justice. Together, they showed that power, when wielded responsibly, can dismantle systems as easily as it can build them. Reflecting on everything, Alina often thought about the invisible lines, the subtle acts of exclusion that pile up over time, unnoticed by many, but painfully clear to those on the receiving end. She understood now that the real battle was not for a seat at a single table, but for the right to exist fully and unapologetically in every space. Her story wasn't unique. It was universal, a reminder that silence is never neutral, that exclusion wears many faces, some smiling, some silent, but all denying humanity. As the sun set over the city skyline, casting a warm glow over Vivra Blanc's restored facade, Alina and Jordan stood together on the terrace looking out at a world both broken and full of promise. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked softly. Jordan smiled, not with certainty, but with resolve. "It has to," he said. "Because once the truth is out, the world can't pretend anymore. The axis has shifted, and it started with one woman refusing to be erased." Alina nodded, feeling the weight and the hope in those words. Her journey was far from over, but the path was clearer now, marked by courage, dignity, and unyielding presence, and that was a victory no one could take away. What this story teaches is courage to claim space. Alina's refusal to be invisible reminds us that dignity begins with standing firm, even when the odds are stacked against us. Power of accountability. Jordan's choice to confront rather than ignore injustice shows that real influence comes with responsibility. The subtlety of exclusion. Discrimination isn't always overt. Often it's the quiet acts that accumulate to silence voices and deny belonging. Change is collective. Individual bravery sparks movements, but lasting progress requires systemic transformation, and community support. Belonging is a right, not a gift. True inclusion demands recognizing everyone's inherent worth, beyond appearances, status, or background. This is more than a story about a table at a restaurant. It's a call to recognize who we exclude, why and how we choose to rewrite those rules. Because history doesn't always happen in courts or capitals. Sometimes it happens over dinner, and sometimes it starts with one person simply refusing to step aside.